مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. أخيرا وبعد مضي 24 شهرا على الانتخابات 2020 التي لا نزال موضع نزاع، حان موعد انتخابات جديد. ملايين الناخبين سيدلون بأصواتهم لتحديد من سيكون له السيطرة على مجلسي الشيوخ والنواب. الجمهوريون متحمسون لكسر سيطرة الديمقراطيين الكاملة على البيت الأبيض والكونغرس، بينما الديمقراطيون مدفوعون بخوفهم من عودة دونالد ترامب التدريجية لتصدر المشهد الوطني. فرص الفريقين كبيرة، والخبراء يتوقعون نتائج متقاربة بشكل مفاجئ. ما هي المنافسات التي يجب أن نراقبها لفهم الحالة الانتخابية الأمريكية؟ وما هي المنافسات التي ستحدد اتجاه السياسة الأمريكية في العامين المقبلين؟ وما هي المنافسات التي ستدفع جو بايدن ودونالد ترامب إلى اتخاذ القرارات بشأن خطوتهما الخاصة بالترشح للرئاسة مرة أخرى؟ لتبسيط وتفسير ما الذي سيحدث في يوم الانتخابات، يسعدني أن أرحب باثنين من الصحفيين السياسيين البارزين، أليكس جانجيتانو وجيسيكا تايلور. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Well, finally, this is our last show before America's November midterm elections. Polls show a remarkably tight race nationwide between Republican and Democratic candidates for control of the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. Today, we're going to help you, our viewers, follow this election and interpret the results. I'm delighted to welcome Jessica Taylor and Alex Gangitano to help us do just that. All right, so Jessica, traditionally, if past results forecast anything, it shouldn't be a very close election, but it is. Why?
This is what's made this election so unusual and difficult for, analysts and handicappers such as myself, is that we rely a lot on historical data. And what we see historically is that a president's first midterm election, they lose seats more in the House than in the Senate. But we've seen that pretty steadily happen. There are anomalies such as George W. Bush's first midterm election in 2002, but that was right after 9/11, of course. His popularity was still incredibly high. There was a sense of sort of national unity. And again, looking by the numbers where President Biden's approval ratings are, it should not be a close election. You are correct. But I think there's been a couple of things that have sort of upset the historical norm, and we'll see on election day if this sort of holds true. First of all, the Dobbs decision that came down in late June that overturned Roe v. Wade sent the issue of abortion back to the states. Until then, we were really seeing an enthusiasm gap that was key, and what that we do see in midterm elections, where Republican voters were more energized, more likely to vote, but Democratic voters were more likely to stay home. And that was really a danger to Democrats. We saw a bump in Biden's approval ratings, gas prices started to drop. And then another thing that I think is just making this another sort of anomaly is that midterm elections are supposed to be about the incumbent president, a referendum on the incumbent. But you have the previous president, President Trump, that has inserted himself in the election in a way that is, we know Trump doesn't do anything traditionally or by, historical or political norms, that he has inserted himself so much into the election with picking candidates, picking weak candidates, particularly that have put these races that should be easy Republican pickups in danger, particularly in the Senate. And the fact that he's, holding out there that he's going to run again, that you have in many places where Biden's approval numbers are not great, Trump's are worse. So Democrats can sort of successfully make the case that this is a referendum on Trump as well, not just on them. Do you want these Trump type candidates to win? And what happens when he runs for another term in 2024?
So Alex, Jessica is saying that this breaks the mold of past midterm elections. Do you agree with that? And what would you help our viewers point to as some of the key trends that will help determine what happens on November 8th?
Yeah, Jessica's right. Historically, of course, as she mentioned, the president's party does not do very well in the midterm elections. But the fact that the Senate is so in play right now is fascinating, for political watchers. I think the House Republicans have an easier path to taking over the House, but the Senate still is very much in play. And we're seeing these Republican candidates, Trump-backed candidates running in the Senate that aren't polling as well as they should be this close out. And then there's been a lot of really interesting factors at play in this election. So, of course, as Jessica mentioned, the Dobbs decision has been a huge indicator of how will female voters respond to that in the midterm elections. This is the first real litmus test of that. And we've had candidates, especially Trump-backed candidates, that are very staunchly pro-life. And the issue of abortion is something that Democrats have been really working hard to keep in the forefront of this campaign season. Well, you're hearing from Republicans that they kind of want to back away from that. They want to focus on the economy. They want to focus on crime and immigration, the southern border of the U.S., whereas those are issues that the president does not poll well on at all. We're seeing him around the low 40s overall in his approval rating, but on issues like crime and immigration and the economy, he polls even lower. So if Democrats can pull this off with the Democratic president polling like that, it will be a really anomaly kind of year. And then we've had some crazy things also happen, these so-called October surprises happen. And one of the huge ones is Republican candidate Herschel Walker in Georgia was accused of or allegedly paid for one of his former girlfriend's abortions. Walker is a huge pro-life candidate. And so that's something that has also just continued to keep abortion at the forefront, made Republicans have to keep talking about abortion as much as they don't want to. And I think that's really showed polling gear more towards Democrats.
So, and Jessica, if we applied the time-honored principle of following the money, where are Democrats focusing their pot of money in these final days of the election that they think a little bit more of effort may turn the tide in a critical race?
For me, it comes down to 3 states in the Senate: Nevada, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. I think these are the 3 that will decide the majority. Now, Pennsylvania is an open seat held by Republicans. That's where you have Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman facing off against celebrity Dr. Mehmet Oz. Fetterman was polling much better in August and in the summer, but I think there was a bit of a sugar high across the board for some Democratic candidates, and we're seeing this tightening. And you're seeing both parties just pour a ton of money in there, including Republican super PACs that have come in to help sort of bail Oz out. And they've really attacked Fetterman, particularly on crime. We're seeing that having a big impact on the Pennsylvania race and in the Wisconsin race that I think is now sort of trending toward in Republicans' direction. So if Democrats are able to flip that seat, that means that Republicans have to flip both of those other 2 seats I mentioned that are currently Democratic held. Now in Nevada, I think that Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is the most vulnerable Democratic incumbent. I've thought that all cycle. Her Republican challenger compared to some of the other candidates has been scandal-free. He's sort of basic generic Republican, Adam Laxalt, former attorney general whose grandfather was also a governor and senator. And then, as Alex mentioned, that Georgia race there with Herschel Walker, football star, versus Raphael Warnock, who flipped the seat 2 years ago in that special election. Now he's running for a full 6-year term. I mean, that continues to be very close. And I'm not, how this abortion scandal impacts it, we will see. I would also note that we may not know on November 8th or the morning after who wins the Senate, because same thing that happened in both Georgia races could happen again. You have to get 50%. This could go to a December 6th runoff to decide the majority. And so to me, it comes down to those. But I think if we're seeing a shift, we're seeing a very small shift. Now, it could just be a wash where maybe Democrats flip Pennsylvania and Republicans flip Nevada, and we're still at 50-50 and Democrats still hold the majority because of Vice President Kamala Harris, or that it could be 51-49 either way. So it certainly it's going to be close, I think. Very much so. Maybe I'd put a sort of a pinky on the scale for Democrats at this point. And the money, we are also seeing it's interesting where they're not spending, particularly in Arizona. That was another race that seemed like a top target, but Republicans have a very damaged candidate there against Democratic Senator Mark Kelly. So those are sort of where we're seeing a lot of the money concentrating. Now, there's other states that are still in play, but again, I think those three are the crux. Tell me how those go, and I'll tell you who's won the Senate.
All right. So if Jessica has told us where the money is going, Alex, where, if any place, are the two heads of the party, Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Where are they focusing their efforts? And do candidates want Joe Biden and Donald Trump to show up for them in these final days of the election?
That's a really interesting question, because we've seen throughout this cycle, Democrats in some places kind of pushing away from wanting to appear with President Biden, especially when his approval ratings were so low over the summer, especially in Ohio. Democrat Tim Ryan, who's more moderate Democrat, he's a member of the House and he's running for the Senate. He didn't necessarily want to appear with President Biden, and then over time he was ready to be aligned with him. Of course, President Trump in his own way is extremely controversial, depending on what kind of Republican you are. But a lot of the really big Republicans running in these seats that Jessica mentioned that are so closely watched and where the money is, they're close with the president, and they want his endorsement, and their supporters like that they're aligned with the president. That's Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. That's Herschel Walker in Georgia. The former president has come out for those people. What's interesting is in Colorado, the current president, Joe Biden, has gone to that state. There's an interesting race with Senator Bennett there. And then his challenger, the former president, has visited and supported him. We've also seen in North Carolina, former President Trump has showed face there and tried to get involved in that election. But there is still such an interesting dynamic of where we'll see them go, in these last moments before the election, or where these two presidents, the current president and former President Trump, will want to appear, because there's still kind of this shying away of how much do you line with Trump, how much do you not? And then as approval ratings have shifted a little better for President Biden, how much do people want to appear with him? So it's been interesting to watch those changing tides over the cycle.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to ask Alex and Jessica to look at any key variables in just the last few days of the election that could change the vote just marginally, but just enough to put one party or the other over the top. In just a moment. As an historian, I like anniversaries. They give us an occasion to recall the past and think about its implications for the present. We're about to mark one such anniversary in America's engagement in the Middle East. Indeed, it is part of the 80th anniversary of what I call the most consequential, overlooked week in the entire history of the modern Middle East. The particular event is Operation Torch, the American-led invasion of North Africa that took place on November 7th, 1942. This was, at the time, the largest amphibious assault in history. and in opening a second front against the Nazis, it triggered Churchill's famous remark, calling it the end of the beginning of World War II. Also that week were two other huge events, huge for what they represented, and in the latter case, huge for what it prevented. These included Hitler's response to Torch, the German invasion of Tunisia, the only Arab country occupied by the Nazis, and the Second Battle of El Alamein, where the British stopped the German advance into Egypt, which, if successful, would have meant the Nazi occupation of the Levant and the annihilation of the Jewish communities of both Egypt and Palestine. The second week of November 1942, think about what happened, about what didn't happen, and about what might have been. It sends shivers down your spine. Again, my guests today include Alex Gangitano. Alex is White House reporter for The Hill, where she was previously the Herd on the Hill and the lobbying reporter. Earlier in her career, she was a staff writer for CQ Roll Call. Also joining us is Jessica Taylor. Jessica is the Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, and she is senior author of the 2022 edition of the Almanac of American Politics, one of the Bibles, as it were, of understanding our political system. Previously, she was a political reporter for National Public Radio and NBC News. All right, Alex, let me ask you this. When you get down to the final days of an election, anything can affect the ultimate vote. Turnout, getting your voters to the polls, any last-minute news stories about this or that candidate. When you look at this, which party in these key races, if either, which party seems sort of better prepared with what's called the ground game, getting their voters to the polls, getting their voters registered, the enthusiasm, as it were, for their candidates in these key races?
Yeah, that's a good question. As we're reaching the final days, I think the enthusiasm has been able to really remain among young people. And a lot of that had to do with the Dobbs decision over the summer to overturn abortion rights in the country. And so young people were really, really energized then, were protesting, were engaging, and it was up to Democrats to try to keep them engaged up until November. And I think they've done a good job of doing that and trying to bring those people out. Midterm elections oftentimes do not have a very good voter turnout when there's not a presidential candidate attached to the ticket. And so it's always a challenge to try to get young people out, to try to get middle-aged people with children and busy lives, to want to actually vote in these off-year elections. And so I think abortion is a huge issue. I think gun violence is another thing that people were really passionate about over the summer, especially after some awful shootings we've had in the US. And so Democrats have tried to hold on to that passion and bring it to the polls. And I think they've done a good job of keeping that also on the forefront. But then on the Republican side, the economy is still not where it should be. We still are gearing towards, are we going to be in a recession or not? Gas prices have been fluctuating. They were going down. Now they're kind of creeping up a bit. And so that's something that Republicans have been really focused on, getting people to care about that and want to come out to the polls and elect Republicans.
All right, we only have a few seconds left. Earlier, Jessica, you put a little pinky on the scale for the Democrats in the Senate, but otherwise an extraordinarily close vote there. Alex, what's your prediction about the Senate?
I'm with Jessica. I think that I would also gear the scales towards Democrats. And I think they'll be able to hold on and maybe gain a couple seats so that they could get more democratic agenda policies done, unlike this split we have right now going on.
And both of you, I think that there will be at least a small Republican majority emerging in the House. Is that right?
Yeah, but it's down certainly from what we thought at the beginning of the cycle. Our current projection is between 5 and 20 seats versus it was much higher. So even if Republicans do win, would-be Speaker Kevin McCarthy has a much smaller majority that he has to wrestle with.
Alex, you concur?
Yep. That's right. I agree.
There you have it.
It'll be close.
All right, then we have our final predictions from Jessica Taylor and Alex Gadgetano. Thank you both so much for joining us on Dakhel Washington. Voters have not yet gone to the ballot box. Votes have not yet been counted. Winners have not yet been declared. But already our 2024 election has begun. The rest time between elections in America has been shrinking for years, but not at any moment in my memory has it been non-existent, to the point that the next election has started before the last election has finished. That's because there's a very good chance that our 2024 presidential election will be a repeat of our 2020 presidential election. Having the same candidates on the top of the ticket of 2 elections in a row is something that hasn't happened in our country since the 1950s, when Dwight David Eisenhower, the war hero, twice defeated Democratic Senator Adlai Stevenson. And having the same candidate on the top of his party's ticket 3 elections in a row, which is what the case would be if Donald Trump runs again, is not something that has happened since Franklin Roosevelt led the Democratic ticket 4 times in the 30s and 40s. But Roosevelt won each time. The last time a candidate won, then lost, then ran again at the top of his party's ticket was, well, it was a very, very long time ago. But my guess, the allure of the Oval Office is too great for Trump to walk away from. He doesn't seem the type to stand and applaud as some other Republican carries the flag into battle against the Democrats. And for his part, Joe Biden will probably view it as a national mission to defeat Trump in 2024 as he did in 2020. Indeed, if almost anyone else ran for the Republicans, there's a reasonable chance Biden might step aside to pass the torch to a younger candidate. But the mission to defeat Trump and Trumpism is a powerful stimulant, even for the oldest person ever to serve in the White House. I think this is the most likely 2024 lineup, no matter what happens in our congressional elections. If the Democrats hold on to Congress, Trump will view it as a challenge to his manhood and to his legacy, and he will want another chance to defeat Biden. Biden will view it as an affirmation of his wise leadership and will want another chance to bury Trump. If, however, Republicans take control of one or both houses of Congress, Trump will view it as the beginning of the restoration, and Biden will view himself as the lone figure standing in defense of his values against an America First resurgence. I know a lot can change in politics and a lot can change very fast, but there's sort of an inevitability about a rematch in 2024, like those Ali versus Frazier fights in the 1970s. So watch the election results closely, but get ready. The heavyweights are about to enter the ring all over again. وصلنا إلى ختام حلقتنا من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول الآثار المترتبة على الانتخابات التشريعية للعامين المقبلين، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.